But what I want to do first of all is have a bit of a chat about the assignment. I've had a look at some of them. Haven't uploaded the marks yet, but I've had a look. It's not due quite yet, but thank you for those who have got it in and knocked it off. And I'm seeing some really good stuff in there, really good analysis of intersections from a road safety perspective, understanding of different elements that contribute to risk at intersections, and some pretty good categorization of things into exposure, to likelihood, and to severity. There's a few things I want to point out, and I've popped a couple of slides at the start of the presentation just on specific things that I'm seeing people are having a bit of trouble with. But I'm keen for anybody to volunteer that we can have a little walk through their particular intersection, and we'll jump into it on Street View. So what I'll ask is anybody who would like to do that to just raise their hand, and I'll give you the ability to unmute yourself, and then we'll find your intersection to have a chat about. We'll see if anybody, Reggie. Okay, so allow to talk. So hopefully now you can unmute yourself. And can we hear you?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, hello, excellent.
Good, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, very well. Thank you for volunteering, and I think you're going to win a prize immediately for volunteering. Now, remind me, where was your intersection so I can find it?
Yeah, my intersection is the guardrail. It's a Kokoda Street in the Stewart Drive, on the state highway, in the Townsville, actually, in the Queensland.
Townsville, okay.
Yeah.
So hang on a second. I just got to.
You can open my assignment or no?
I could. It'll take me longer to do that than just type it in. So what was the? Was it? Did you say?
Should I type here?
Yeah. Can you type it into the? No.
Yeah. Kokoda Street. Stewart Drive.
Oh, Stewart. Sorry. Yeah.
Stewart Drive. Yeah.
Yeah. Pop that in. And,
and now I think so. You will see that one.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Let's grab that.
Yeah.
And we'll jump in and we'll have a look at this one. And is this near your house or office, or just one you're working on?
It's between my house and office.
Okay. All right.
Open my assessment.
Second to get there. Here we go.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's a T intersection. I'll bring it up just in a second.
Yeah. So should I put the link if you'd like?
No, I've got it.
Got
I'm just going to share my screen now, and then we'll talk it through. The amazingness of technology, huh? Here we go. Okay. Hopefully you can see that.
Yeah, I can see.
Good. And this is the correct intersection?
That's correct, yeah.
Oh, look at all the fast food.
Yeah, actually, yeah. There is a, if you see on the right hand side, there is a Guzman Gamizo board is there. So if you see, if you're coming opposite side, there is a McDonald's, there is a Red Rooster, and there is a BP service station, not on that side, on the opposite side. Yeah. If you can, you will see.
Side.
Yeah, if you can further.
Okay.
Not that one.
Are they down the road, or?
If you're, that is, you can see the board, that board.
Yep.
No, not that one. If you can further rotate.
I'm just going to go up here and see where they are.
Yeah. Okay, I'll just.
Oh, yeah.
So you have to come here, probably where the Nando's feel like this. This is the whole shopping center, like McDonald's and these autos and Subway. And so ultimately, section is where your mouse is. If you can go a little bit down, where there is arrow is. Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah. Okay. All right. No, that's okay. There's a little bit of context, but let's have a look at this intersection in particular, and I'll just come back a little bit and then turn around. Oh, it's a big culvert there, but that's
on the left hand side there is a sporting complex, so it's a football and cricket grounds is there. So it's a Murray sporting complex. So for the Townsville, I think so it's the biggest sporting complex entire Townsville. So football, hockey, everything.
So let's have a look at this sort of systematically. We start with exposure. All right. What are the kind of things impacting on the exposure to crashes here? Remembering exposure in a safe system assessment context is the amount of people exposed to crashes, the number of people, so the number of cars, the number of
So the ADT, like annual average traffic, is 24,000 vehicles per day. ADT is 24,000. And pedestrian counts, I don't have exact amount, but what happened right now, pedestrians are crossing from the sporting complex and they are going to the foodery, like where the McDonald's and other things. So they're crossing. If you can little bit go on the down south, they are crossing like it's not safe, but they are crossing from that road, not on that side. So that you can see that board. So people are going to that McDonald's, this Red Rooster, and there is a other BP service station where the service road is going left side. So they are crossing from here, like from the right hand side to left hand side. So that at the intersection also they are crossing. So that's major thing for consideration.
Very good. Okay, so there's a couple of exposure ones immediately, and that's good. And you'll find when we next module get into the real mechanics of scoring exposure, we do like to have the traffic counts. We would love to have pedestrian counts and cyclist counts and things, but sometimes you just don't get that, and you've got to make a bit of a judgment call, just as you've sort of done there, where you say, well, there is a desire line there from the sporting stadiums over to the shops there, and there's you can make some judgment calls in your assessment on how many pedestrians are making that move. So that's good. Do you have ideas on the traffic volume of the side road?
Side road we don't have, but actually we are just recently we are trying to get the traffic count on particular that side one. I don't have it at this moment.
That's okay.
But it's underway.
Interestingly, in a safe system assessment, if you've got an intersection like this and one of the legs is above 20,000 vehicles a day, it gets the maximum exposure score for intersection crashes anyway. So it actually it's not going to matter what the
that's right.
Is. But that's of interest to us in the thinking about delays and people getting impatient, making sort of more rash moves in
unsafe crossing.
Okay, that's really good. Okay, and we again would look at that on the number of cyclists through here. Is this a popular cycling route or not sure?
Not principal one, but it's a cycling route as well. So if you see on both the sides, there is a pathway on the right hand side and left hand side. But only facilities we don't have is a crossing. Like people, there is a residence as well where you see the Guzman Gamizo sign. It's a Kokoda Street, so there is a very big complex. Like people are crossover, and during the events in the sporting complex, people are doing unsafe crossing. So that is the main thing here.
Okay, that's good. That's good. Okay, so you'd be thinking about the number of cyclists and also the number of motorcyclists, and a little rule of thumb. Usually, if you don't have motorcycle volumes, which often people don't, you can sort of use 1 to 2% of
1%. I think so. Yeah, we can consider 1%. That's right.
That's about it. Okay, good. So we've established like the exposure sort of numbers, and they're getting generated by a whole lot of things: a major arterial, a shopping center, a sporting complex, residential areas. So they're all sort of land usey style things that are meaning that we're getting these certain volumes of road users that are exposed to crashes in this area. So let's now jump to the likelihood of crashes and any factors in this intersection area that is influencing the likelihood of crashes. And that could be intersection crashes, it could be run-off road crashes, could be crashes with pedestrians, cyclists, motorcyclists, head-on crashes, any factors of the infrastructure or the environment that is influencing that.
Yeah, so if you see the right turn movement where you are coming from the north and like coming from the south and going north.
This one?
So yeah, that one's very short right turn.
Yep.
Right, CHR short. So that's that one is a bit concerned considering the traffic volume during the peak hours.
And what crash type are you concerned about with the short right turn facility?
Yeah, it's a rear end.
Rear end. Yep. Very good. So as you're categorizing things in a safe system assessment matrix, which we'll get to shortly, you've got to be somewhat clear in your mind about which crash type you're thinking about. And that's good that you're able to say rear end for this. Now, a little interesting nuance of the safe system assessment is that a rear end crash, if we can attribute that to queuing from an intersection, we add it to the intersection crash category. Okay. So that's really, it's good, and it's certainly sort of attributed to the intersection in that sense. But yes, I agree with you. Short right turn lane, and we're going to have queuing, and if it queues back, rear end crash possibility, maybe side swipe as well. But that's excellent. Okay, what else?
Yeah, another the posted speed is 70 at this moment, 70 km/h.
Yep.
So that is likelihood as well as severity as well, because considering the amount of traffic, 24,000, and if you see on the where the another intersection is, so there are two high schools are there. One is Southern Cross and Catholic High School, and another is William Ross State High School. So these kids are they are picking up kids. Kids are going in. Kids are doing using bicycles, and they are crossing and going with their house when they are leaving the schools. So that's major concern in particular for this intersection.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Okay. There's a few things to unpack in that one. So really love the fact that you identified that the speed is both a likelihood and a severity factor, and you're absolutely right, because at higher speeds you're more likely to crash because you've got less time to react, evade, and the like, and also the severity of the crash is more. So that's really like a great item usually, and you see it often in both exposure and likelihood and severity for many different crash types. And then the school children one's an interesting one. So to a degree, we will factor that in terms of their presence there in the exposure of pedestrian crashes. So the numbers that are generated. But there's a few of the specifics of schools that we can attribute into the likelihood factors as well. So the fact that we're getting large numbers in concentrated periods of time. So the exposure sort of this AADT, the annual average daily traffic, or the sort of averaged out pedestrian numbers or cyclist numbers. But when you sort of get them in a bulk, we have an increase in the likelihood there by that sort of influxing pulses of pedestrians. So that's a bit of a likelihood factor, as you're pointing out. The fact that they're school children can also increase the likelihood in the fact that we know cognitive abilities of children aren't quite up there yet. There's also a degree of horseplay, for lack of a better term, that happens around schools and school children. I mean, that's part of being a youngster often. And with that generates some risk, the ability to sort of perceive and understand risk, and that's part of the cognitive ability it hasn't quite developed at certain younger ages. So you can again increase the likelihood a little bit based on the fact that they are students or younger pedestrians. So that's a really good one as well. What else did you have? Any other factors?
In terms of the safety, I think so. There is right turn movement is not allowed, so I don't think so. That's much thing here, not on from opposite side, right?
Yeah. So this is where, as you're coming out
just
here,
left here.
It's a left turn only.
Only,
so, again, really great that you've sort of categorized this in the likelihood factor, and I really do. I like the fact that you've done that, because people often are very tempted to put that as an exposure factor. Now, the only way we can attribute this into the exposure at this intersection is if we had some accurate numbers on the reduced volume of traffic associated with that. So if we had this intersection at an earlier stage, perhaps where there was right turn out allowed, and we were altering it to left out only, if we had some modeling and some changed numbers associated with this, number of vehicles exiting and using the intersection, we could use that in our exposure score, right? But if we don't have that sort of stuff, the actual fact that we have less conflict points in a safe system assessment is attributed in the likelihood category, just as you've done there. So that's really, that's great. And it's certainly going to reduce the likelihood, because we don't have that movement going out to the right there. So good, great one. Now, a few other likelihood factors. Do you want me to run through a few? Okay, so stand-up angle of this slip lane doesn't look too nice. So we know that the stand-up angle, so that's basically the angle we see that entry point. I mean, 70 degrees, sort of your absolute minimum there. So this is a little bit of an awkward angle, and it's hard for some drivers to be able to turn their neck that far. It also sort of attributes to this sense of, I'm just going to go because I'm sort of half committed. The addition of this little extra doohickey here is going to increase the likelihood of crashes in that sense. It is a sort of not even half. It's a little bit of acceleration lane, which is just going to add to people's desire to put the foot down there where it may not be appropriate. So, and jumping to what could be done about this sort of stuff. To me, this is either you do it properly, you get a proper acceleration lane going there, and you merge them in with the appropriate lengths, or you square this up a bit more and remove that temptation to go when it's not really appropriate to go. So stand-up lane is one there. A couple of other things, I mean, attributing to either increase or decrease of likelihood. And some things, I suppose, decreasing the likelihood of crashes here. And you pointed out removal of one of the turns. We do have lighting there. We have decent delineation and signage. So, it's there showing us what to do. It's fairly clear and open in sight lines, sight distance, great sight distance out there. You wouldn't be expecting vehicles to be missed. So there's some good attributes there. The one other one here is a dynamic visual obstruction issue. And this is just like embedded in a lot of our standards and guidelines. And I'm sure many of you have sort of pondered this issue in your time, is that we have a left turn facility here, and we've got a through facility next to it. And so if you had, for example, a truck dropping off tacos to the shop there, and it's coming in, it's doing a left turn there, it is actually blocking the sight lines for the exiting driver here to anything that might be masked behind it. So that, I always look for that, especially in designs and things like that, as a likelihood increasing factor. you've got a good distance, I suppose, there from that point up to where it happens due to the sheer size of this intersection. But there are some features that can be done, and I'm enjoying seeing some of the, like, we always mock up these little hand sketches of a separator style facility here with you pushing your left turn lanes, your open sight lines. But it's nice to see some of that actually happening. I think TMR have got a few standard drawings of that. I may be wrong. You might know. Or you might not. Well, anyway, I've seen them somewhere.
Yeah.
So that's another likelihood factor. Then if we talk about like run-off road crashes or the like, some likelihood factors with run-off road, the likelihood of run-off road is influenced by things like the alignment. So this is fairly straight. So that's going to reduce the likelihood. It's got sealed shoulders. It's got edge lines. It's got some median. But in the roadside, there are objects. Now, at the moment, in the likelihood category, I'm not going to make judgment on whether these objects are frangible or not. I'm just going to note their presence because their frangibility, their friendliness is a severity factor. So the fact that we have light posts there, and we've got light posts there, and we've got these, the Hungry Jack's sign there. Now, as I said, I'm seeing that that's slip based, but I'm not taking that into account yet. It's their presence. They're there. And we've got trees in the background of the background hazard, as they call in the new Part 6 to road design. We've got, so there are things in the roadside. We saw some culverts and other things. So that's stuff to influence the likelihood of run-off road. We've got a lot that reduces the likelihood of run-off road, being the sealed shoulders, the delineation. There is reasonable offset and maybe sort of clear zones as such. That's all likelihood related stuff. So there's just a few, and I haven't even really got onto pedestrians and cyclists and lack of pedestrian facilities or setbacks and whether they're sight lines to pedestrian. But let's talk about any severity factors you had there. Anything that you mentioned one already, which was the speed. Was there anything else?
Speed one,
That was your big one?
Yeah, that's the big one.
And it is, and you're spot on there. I mean, speed is such a major influence there. The other things that you might start to analyze in your severity when we're talking intersection style crashes, angles of crashes. Okay, while we're not happy from a likelihood perspective on this exit, the severity is going to be less due to that angle of crash. The right turn in, though, we've got a fairly right angle, not probably quite right angle. The presence of vulnerable road users is certainly one. And then we go, if we're talking about run-off road crashes, this is where we start to go, what is the frangibility of our different roadside hazards? So we've got a power pole here, which is obviously not frangible. And so that's there within an area. You'll notice I don't tend to use this clear zone theory anymore. It's kind of been pushed out with the new Part 6 to the Austroads Guide to Road Design, Part 6, which is roadside. Clear zones have been sort of moved out into a slightly different way of thinking about roadside hazard management. The reason for that, right, is that there was this non-logical way of treating roadside hazards with clear zones. And when you sort of question people about it, they can see that the logic of it was wrong, but they sort of still did it. And let me explain it to you. So what we were getting was industry coming along and saying, calculating their clear zone based on the volume and speed and the curvature and those sorts of things, and using their graph, and they go, yep, okay, clear zone of whatever it was. So they say it's 6 meters or something like that. And they go edge line out to 6 meters, and they go anything, and say this is at 6.1 meters. And it's not, but let's just say that. Yep. 6.1 meters out here. They go 6 meters, anything in there is a hazard. 6.1, not a hazard. you go, oh, okay, okay, the clear zone chart says that, but practically, logically, we all know that, okay, it's going to be more risky here and less 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 and less, right? But we were seeing brand new roads being built with fixed hazards just running at like, 9.1 or 10.1, whatever their clear zone was, just outside that of this row of fixed hazards. And you're like, okay, we're taking this as somehow risk just dropped to nothing in that space of a centimeter, and you go, that's crazy. So this is where that alteration it's more of an understanding of that spread of risk that continues out there. It's caused us a lot of trouble, obviously, with decision making on whether you need to protect a hazard or not, and there's new ways to do that. I don't have time in this to run through all of that with you, but certainly that's why. Sorry, that's the clear zone sort of discussion. But so the fact that this is non-frangible increases severity of runoff road. The fact that other ones are frangible, like this one, that's a slip-based pole there, and we'll see some. We saw some of all the lights were slip-based. Yeah, the lights were slip-based. I thought. Okay, that's an impact absorbing. So that will crush on impact. Interesting, they've used that at that location. That's okay. And we saw some other ones, I think, were actual slip-based poles. No, that looks rigid. Okay, so you can see the process I'm going through here. Rigid, slip, is it frangible, is it not? And it's just making me start to adjust the severity of runoff road crashes. If they were all slip-based, or there was a barrier system all the way along, the severity would be very low for anybody who ran off the road.
Yep.
If they're fixed, if we've got fixed hazards, or we've got culvert end walls like that, it's going to be more severe. So it increases your severity. That's great. Okay. We won't continue on with that, but what were your ideas there, Ranjit, on how we could improve some of these things? Did you have some ideas?
Not much, but I think so. What we can do, we may have to spend a little bit more money if we make it this signalized intersection. Then probably we can improve more safety in terms of this exposure likelihood or severity. So if we make this signalized intersection,
what of exposure likelihood and severity signalizing this, which do you think that would predominantly influence in terms of the chance people crash, or would it make crashes less severe, or would it change the volumes that we're seeing through there?
If we make it signalized and if we make double lane, then we distribute the traffic in 2 lanes, and ultimately we reduce the likelihood. And then probably if we provide specific crossovers for people to cross that, and they can stop on the signals, they can cross here. So we can reduce that severity as well, because if you go further down 200 meters, there is another roundabout is there. So they have to stop immediately, so they can't speed up. And another thing, if you can reduce speed to 60, it will, we can reduce the severity as well.
Yeah, okay. So I love it. The speed reduction, the 60 would reduce severity and likelihood. The signals would reduce the likelihood of crashes here because it's clear. The severity, we wouldn't attribute a change in severity with the installation of the signals, just due to the fact that we know that there will be some red light running, there will be some crashes involving that. There'll be less crashes, but we know that that's still a possibility. The only way I would alter exposure with a set of traffic signals is if I had actual modeling to show me changes in numbers. And, so, like we get tempted to allocate it to exposure because we go, well, no, it's a red light. But we're accounting for people running the red light, making mistakes.
Correct.
So, So that's good. So in a safe system assessment, and we're jumping ahead here. If signals were proposed here, we would be doing an assessment on the existing conditions as it is now. We'd be doing an assessment on the signals, and we'd be then talking about what can we add to those signals to address some areas that haven't been addressed, like the severity. And this might be where we're talking about reducing speeds, as you did with speed limits, or maybe raised platforms, or maybe we actually look at intersection forms that address severity as well. So maybe a roundabout, maybe signalized roundabout. I'm putting cost aside at the moment. Maybe signalized roundabout, or maybe we look bigger at the land use planning here and we say, well, can we block this whole entry off and utilize the fact that there's a roundabout down the road and have a sort of land use planning look at it and say, is there something can be done? We've got a river up there, which is going to cause us challenges in getting people around and in. But, we do a fair bit of that sort of thinking. But that's a really, that was a nice one. And thank you very much for jumping on board and chatting us through it. And I see a few comments and questions have come in. So let's see what's happening here. Okay, a good point from Wayne there on the sort of lack of pavement markings and arrows and things. And that's yes, that's I would attribute that into the likelihood, maybe not as clear for where people might be turning. I mean, maybe the road geometry and everything was enough to do that. Now, here's a question from Liam. So, do you consider the type of crash before you can assess the impact, severity, exposure, or can the assessment be more general? So that one will become very clear in the next module, where we unpack exactly how you go about scoring and doing the assessment, because they are pre-categorized for you in crash type. So you have to put your mind into run-off road crashes, head-on crashes, intersection crashes, pedestrian crashes, motorcycle crashes, cyclist crashes, and there's this other category of crashes. So you will be sort of forced into that style of thinking. Pets from the playing field are crossing down the road and won't use the signals. Okay, so there's some thinking about pedestrian desire lines, and again, we're factoring in like what is the real sort of use of anything that we're predicting in the future. And that, again, another one we'll talk a little bit more about. But safe system assessments, when you're looking at a design, for example, you've got to put your logical hat on and your knowledge of the way people actually behave, not if they follow all the rules every time how they're going to behave. But if you identify it's not on desire lines or these sorts of things, we factor that into the assessment.
Yep.
All right. Well, that was excellent. So thank you, Reggie. That was a really good chat.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay. I'm going to remove you from the. Oh, hang on. No, I nearly kicked you out of the webinar. That would not be good. I'm going to just take you away from the talking. But there you go. Great example of how you can put your hand up and have a chat as we go through different bits and pieces. Excellent. Okay. So hopefully that gave you a little bit of assistance in getting your head around exposure, likelihood, and severity. And I've got my first couple of slides. I just want to reiterate some of the stuff I've just said. But there we go. Here we go. Now you should be seeing my screen, and hopefully now I think we're good. We'll be seeing the. Yes, so we're on to module 3, but I am going to start with a little bit of recapping now on just a couple of points. So I love the fact we're now really heading in this exposure, likelihood, and severity way of identifying risk, and starting to get more and more clarity around what factors are fitting into each of those. That is very critical to a safe system assessment. And we, as we did there with Ranjit, it was all about what is influencing, what can we change to influence, or what is influencing the number of vehicles going through that intersection, the number of pedestrians, number of cyclists. That's our exposure factors. Now, there is a bit of confusion out there on exposure, because in a very traditional sense in road safety, we've used exposure very broadly. We've talked about things like length of time on a crossing, or we've talked about number of conflict points as exposure factors, and we've talked about a whole lot of different things. Also, in that new Austroads Guide to Road Design Part 6, which is roadside hazard management, they use a slightly different exposure calculating methodology, all right? But for safe system assessments, it's tried to remain very simple for exposure, very clear, and very much not double counting anything. So just boil it back to what's influencing the numbers going through there. And so it's, you know, if we've removed a vulnerable road user away from traffic, fully separated or with physical separation, we can attribute that to a change in exposure. And in there, in the Austroads Safe System Assessment Framework, so we see here there are definitions for these things, which I didn't sort of get you too involved in before, but you see there, AADT, side road traffic volumes, number of motorcyclists, number of pedestrians, and the like. That's the key part of it. Because of some of this confusion around exposure, likelihood, severity, how you score different things, where you attribute things, the Austroads Safe System Assessment Framework was sort of developed without having done many, because it was a kind of new process. And that was in 2016, and you know, there was a bit of use of it in the start, and now it's starting to go really, you know, widespread. And we've been doing a lot of them for over a long period of time, and we've identified areas where there is not good clarity in the Austroads document about specific elements. And then we've talked to industry and talked to mainly the Victorian Department of Transport about this, but we've provided these clarity fact sheets on specific scoring issues that aren't well defined. And we've provided all of those on your memory stick and in Moodle, and you'll see them on for things like, well, this one's a relevant one for today's topic. When we have a cycling facility, how do we decide if it's changing the exposure, the likelihood, or severity? So if I've got a bike lane, okay, we know that's likelihood because you're not physically separating. You know, a distracted driver could easily enter that lane and hit a cyclist, right? That's it. It reduces the likelihood a bit. So the cyclist is not directly in the lane, the traffic lane, but it separates it. Okay. You go, well, what about if we give it like a 1 meter buffer? Is that now? No, that's still just reducing the likelihood. What about a 3 meter buffer? No, it's still likelihood, right? What about we put a curve there? Curve, and then there's, I'd still call that likelihood just very much lower. What about a physical barrier system in between? Now I'm into exposure, right? And so there's just some commentary around that sort of stuff. How do you sort of make that call, and where do you make that call? So that's that one. This one's a bit more. We'll talk about this in the last module, but it's okay. You can do a safe system assessment on an intersection, but what if you've got 20 kilometers of road with multiple intersections? How would you do that? But we'll get to that. This one sort of helps you refine likelihood scoring, as does this one. This one's talking about how you get to that exposure score for an intersection, and this one's also in that space. But anyway, you will probably want to refer to these when you're doing your actual assessment, because the best way of learning is to do one and discover all these things and go, I don't know, is this likelihood? Is this exposure? I don't know. And then you might refer to these. We'll get to that. Do keep your questions and comments coming in. That was a good little interactive start there and the discussion on a specific topic. I'm going to run through a few things in this session. So I'm going to start with the movement and place thinking and how it aligns with safe system. And movement and place, or it might be called one network or link and place, depending on which jurisdiction you're in. But it's sort of that land use planning thinking, road hierarchies and those sorts of things. So I'll run through it. We want to identify key characteristics of vulnerable road users. So pedestrian, cycler, motorcyclists that align highly with safe system principles or don't align so highly. And you'll notice that, the last couple of modules, I have been a little bit more concentrated on passenger vehicle crashes and the energy and the angles and all of those sorts of things. We're now going to really focus in on vulnerable road users, hugely important part of our transport system. And then we're going to categorize key risk factors into exposure, likelihood, and severity. And I do hope some of you wake up in the middle of the night thinking, exposure, likelihood, severity, because that's just going to be so important as you go out and do safe system assessments. Don't forget to count your wallies, of course. All right, movement and place. Now, I'm just going to give this sort of generic high-level view of movement and place, and certainly there's people who are their whole life is movement and place, and just understanding that and planning the transport network and thinking about all these sort of characteristics. I'm going to talk at a high level. In the sort of level you need to understand that as a safe system assessor, and I'll explain why. I could have picked any movement and place or one network diagram or anything like that to sort of just explain these principles and concepts. But I picked this one. It's actually an old Sydney one, but it's clear and it's got some colour to it, so I just thought I'd use that one. The principles are the same across all jurisdictions, really. What you have is an acknowledgement that a road or a street can play a place value in society, right? We've known forever that plays a movement function, and that's usually what they were built for, right? To move people and goods, right? But this idea that streets and roads create places is sort of the fundamental alternate thinking around movement and place. And what is a place? Well, a place is an area that we see societal benefit from, trade, interaction, community vibrance, and those sorts of, things, and that's what a place is. So what you then have is like your ability to categorize roads as to their movement function and their place function. And you can start up here at the very easy one of motorways, which have a very high movement function and no place value, okay? You're not going to have trade, interaction, socialization on a motorway. You don't want that, right? And so it is a movement corridor. And I should say that movement is not, though, just about moving cars and trucks. It is movement of people and goods. So in the same sense, we could have a fully separated bicycle sort of superhighway of bicycle area, and that would be just as the same, put in this movement, in a full movement category. You don't want people socializing and trading and interacting on your major cycle route. It is a movement corridor. Okay. Down the other extreme, let's go to the other extreme, something that is like almost exclusively place value, maybe a tiny bit of movement. We're talking about your sort of malls or your very much your shared zone areas, like people interacting, permeating across the whole area, trading, socializing. We see lots of cafes and pubs and bars and shops and fruit stands and entertainers and all that sort of, it's an exciting, wonderful, interactive place from that perspective. And we're not trying to move people and goods through there at any speed or at any volumes. I mean, that's not the function of that street or road in that sense. And then, of course, you can see how it plays out then, where we have things that we have low place value and low movement function are our local streets and those sorts of areas. Now, don't tell the residents of that street that we give it low place value. They will personally, but it's for community and society's value of place overall. You'll get your movement corridors, usually are major arterials pushing through there with high movement and again, not high place value. And then we got this beast, which is the high place value but high movement corridor. And these are usually your high streets, your corridor that was the major movement corridor, and then all of the place built up around it over time, and the shops and the bars and the cafes and it became this sort of it's still our major movement corridor, and yet it's also become a very important place. Now, in a safe system assessment, we don't alter our scoring and our assessment in the terms of how well anything aligns with safe system principles based on this. But what we really do need to do is understand the movement and place categorization and aspirations of an area in order to make meaningful recommendations to the project team on how to get a better alignment with safe system principles. Now, extreme examples of this, if they tell us, this is sort of motorway, and we say 50 km/h speed limits, right, gets you better safe system alignment. Well, we're not wrong. It does get better safe system alignment, but it's like completely counter to the whole like transport function and movement of place and everything we've got going on there. So that would be a meaningless recommendation and just seen as ridiculous, right? And likewise down here, if we've got a place for people and it's clearly categorized that, or there's clear aspiration for being a place for people, we could say barriers, continuous barrier systems on the roadside and increased, stopping pedestrians crossing, confining them to a single crossing point, maybe having one every 150 meters. You're going to get better alignment with safe system principles. Yes, because you don't have that interaction between pedestrians and vehicles. But what you're doing is eroding the place value, and it's not going to align with these objectives. So again, you've got to start to tailor your recommendations based on this. And we can get high alignment with safe system principles using various sort of tools we have in our toolkit at this stage, and no doubt more awesome tools coming in the future as innovative people like sort of yourselves are going to come up with new ideas, new ways to get us improvements. So let's do a little bit of this sort of thinking, and we'll start down here in this sort of places for people. And if you've identified a route and it's been defined, this is a place for people, or we have a road at the moment or a street at the moment, and we want to make it a very place for people orientated area, and you're involved in the safe system assessment, you can make recommendations. It's been interesting over the sort of tactical urbanism and pop-up facilities and the like, how we've been able to change areas out of other areas very nicely and quickly using some of these sort of temporary facilities as per this picture that I've got. But anyway, what I want you to do now is I want to give you a good little bit of time on this. because we're also going to have our stretch break and fill up coffee break as you ponder this, is to have a look at this area. And I've used the old artistic impression here. Yeah, there were planter boxes over some old redundant tram facilities utilizing that area in the last photo. So we've got this area, artistic impression, of course. And it's currently 40 km/h environment. And you can see mixes of road users through there. What we have done is said this is a place for people in our categorization in movement of place. This is down here, quite down here, right? High place value, low movement function, low movement value. What I want you to do over the next 5 minutes or so is to have a think about how you would alter this road environment to get better alignment with safe system principles, right? Acknowledging its movement of place function, being a place for people. And then when you come up with ideas, I'm going to get you to put in brackets after it, either an E for exposure, an L for likelihood, or an S for severity, as in you're saying, this will alter the exposure, the likelihood, or severity. So, you know, maybe you do decide, I want to see road safety barriers down the side of the road here, which will reduce the severity of runoff road crashes for vehicles that leave the road and are going to hit these poles. Now, I hope you won't be saying that, because I hope you can see how much that would erode the place value here. It would give you better alignment with safe system principles and probably block some of the pedestrians walking on the road too. That's bad for place, right? So, but what in the exercise you would write, you know, install flexible barrier system on roadside, S for severity, influencing severity. So I want you to just spend 4 minutes or so. So have a stretch, fill up your coffee or water if you want. Have a think about, you know, some alterations to this area that could be done to make it better aligned with safe system principles, and also acknowledging it's a place for people function. Jot them into the chat and we'll come back in 4 minutes. Okay, good question there, Cayman. Is it a public transport corridor? Yes, it's got, yep, it's a bus corridor, as you've seen there. Don't get too worried though about the particulars of it. It's more the general idea that we're running with. Okay, I'll give you another minute or so just to jot your ideas down, and then we'll have a look. This is good. I'm seeing lots of great stuff coming in here, and let's move through a few of these, but do type them in as you would like to go. And a few of you, or actually lots of you, putting it out there to everybody, which is nice to see. A good bit of chat going on. So we see there. Now, Alex is quick off the mark there with saying pedestrians only. Why, if it's a big place for people, it's the place for people, why are we putting cars through there at all? And that's going to influence the exposure. And I'm going to give a prize for speed on that, and just great sort of movement in place thinking, aligning with safe system principles. So quick off of that, and I see a few others having similar thoughts. But that's a great question to be asking. Can we just actually alter that from that perspective? And in a safe system assessment, you discover that if you were to eliminate exposure or alter exposure, you alter the end risk very significantly. Neil's gone there, one-way shared street with altered landscape, and this is good. Again, along very similar sort of lines of thinking of, does it need to be this corridor through? Now, one way, and one way is an interesting one. A one-way system really, in theory, under a safe system assessment, will alter the likelihood of crashes as the dominant one, unless it alters the volume of vehicles. Now, so if you were to make one road one way and then parallel road the other way, and some sort of, and you basically have the same amount of cars, they're just all going in one direction, for example, that is an alteration only to the likelihood. The exposure scores are still the same. You might get a little alteration in crash severity based on the angles of crashes that are more likely to happen. The likelihood comes down to ease for pedestrians to know where vehicles are coming from, to be an easier crossing task often. But you can get increases in likelihood if speeds go up and other things. So something that you sort of think about. But then in the idea there from Neil was the idea of a shared street or a shared zone. And shared zones are very much an area where pedestrians have priority. In fact, I say very much an area, that's what the road rules say. A shared zone is a place for pedestrian priority over vehicles, and that aligns very well with the place area. And then landscaping and those sorts of things to complement that. So that's going to reduce your likelihood and severity, most likely due to the fact that speeds will be very low, and it's got that regulatory aspect to it. We can talk a little bit more about the details of that at later points in terms of surface, alterations and distributing, making it not look like a road. So mixing up your parking if there is parking there, or having, as Neil said there, landscaping and all sorts of exciting things. So then we go on to some of the crossing points. People are interested in providing some crossing points. Now, this one's a real dependence on how much actual movement function they want within that place, because a crossing point is immediately an indication that this is a movement corridor predominantly for vehicles. Because by saying to pedestrians, you can cross here and here, it's immediately a sort of psychological mind frame of, maybe the word's not right there, but it's a road. Now you can cross at distinct points. It's a road for vehicles. But if you have ability to cross everywhere in a very safe manner, it's more got the place feel, because it's the place, and vehicles going through there are the odd ones out. So, but as you raise a movement function requirement out of an area, there comes to a point where, yes, you alter that and you start to provide those crossing points. So that's a real sort of situation dependent one. But I'm seeing a lot of people here with lowering speeds, and speeds should be well down. And that's absolutely right. Like, speed for vehicles through here is not our, in fact, speed for cyclists through here is not our, priority. Like, it's about providing that place feel to it. Raise safety platforms and the like to keep those speeds down are very much ensuring that we have less likelihood of crashes, but also the severities down, because they will bring the speeds down as well. So some really good extra comments here. People very much along these lines. So people talking about different contrasting colours and the like to try to bring likelihood factors down, and ways to change the environment to be more place, which is giving us that better alignment with safe system principles. So I think I won't get through everybody's comments there. I've had a sort of quick scan. I think I've taken some of the main points, and I think you've done really, really well there. So let's look at artistic impressions of alterations to this. I better get rid of the barrier there. That's not going to help, is it? But I'm not saying this is right, but this is sort of artistically a similar area where you've got these big widened footpaths, which reduces the likelihood of crashes. You've got very low speeds, reducing the likelihood. This is providing some movement function. As I said, I don't think they need these crossing points as such. I mean, you could, if you can texture the whole area and have it as a shared zone, it's a far better outcome. I think this is actually from a country that I don't think uses that the concept of shared zones. So it's actually from the USA, interestingly, which doesn't look like it. Looks more European, but they're trying to move and get some more of that into some of the cities, which is wonderful to see. But you can see immediately that this area has more place value. And I would assume you can see there also that it's going to be far, far safer in terms of it's going to have reduced exposure because less vehicles are going through there. It's going to have less likelihood of crashes because of slower speeds. It's got wider footpaths and the like. And the severity is going to be significantly down. Winds all around. As you raise that movement requirement, you can start to see some ways that this kind of starts to get produced. This is as you're almost, getting out of these major sort of place for people only thinking. But remember, I'm not saying here that it's about moving cars and trucks only. It's about moving people and goods. So we're seeing there like dedicated cycle facilities as a major sort of movement path there, public transport. And this is where, exactly as I said there, as we're starting to increase that, we're getting sort of crossing points, but still big areas for pedestrians to provide that livability, the trade, the interaction, socialization, and all of those things that we align. That really, I mean, in these places for people, this is maximum sort of speeds. We'd want anything traveling, okay? Because movement function, is really not our major priority. I mean, it's increased, but that's not the big one. So, well done there. Let's move to local streets, and we won't do the same exercise for this, but it's because it's very similar. There's a couple of key points I want to make though. When you're in the area that has low place value and low movement function, you end up prioritizing the safety of the most vulnerable. And in fact, that's sort of like transport planning 101, which many of you probably did at university and the like. And it's, you design and manage for the road user expending the most amount of their own energy, and they actually happen to be the most vulnerable. So when we're down here, we end up making decisions which are more sort of place related, but we still have more recognition of the movement function. So when you get an area maybe like this, and if it was to be said that, well, actually this is sort of low movement, low place value, you still can sort of see the alterations that can be made to more something like this, where we're still retaining some movement function through there. It's low speed though, because getting vehicles through the residential areas at fast is not the priority. You maybe will have some collectors where you've increased the movement function and down the place function a bit, but we really don't need to be pumping vehicles through there, or you don't want to encourage vehicles to use it as rat runs and the like. And these are common sense transport planning related thinking, but it does play out more in some more tricky scenarios. And these are particularly tricky scenarios. Vibrant streets, the high streets, and the like. So let's do this one as another little exercise, and it was a little bit more challenging, as you'll see. Okay, we've got the big arterial, but it's got the shops and the bars and the cafes and the farmers market and all that happen all up on the different sides. And it's currently running at 70 kilometers per hour. Lots of lanes, as you can see, but it's got the pedestrian overpass there. It's got a little bit of pedestrian fencing in the middle. Now, what we're saying here is that this is high place value. It's also high movement value. So when you do the same little exercise, I'm going to give you a little less time this time, because no need for your stretch break and refill of a coffee. Just have a think about what can we alter in this road environment to improve alignment with safe system principles, but also get it better aligned with both that movement and place function that we wanted to do. So have a think about that. Pop some ideas into the chat. Do put in there exposure, likelihood, severity. But remember, it does have that place value function as well as a movement function. So let's see how we go with that. I'll give you a few minutes to Okay, let's have a look at what people are popping in here. Okay, so we're seeing some facilities to increase the ability for pedestrians to store and cross, and those are going to reduce the likelihood of crashes, absolutely. I've got a few people wanting to put barrier systems up to really sort of separate that. Now, that's an interesting one. I mean, that is very aligned with the movement of the vehicles through the area at speed. It will degrade the place value though. So remember that, but this still has that high place value. So we're in a bit of a dilemma there, aren't we? I'll agree you'll get better safe system alignment, but are we degrading the place value, which is a desire there? Designated bus facilities and cycle facilities, and this is where we can get that continued movement and still have some place value if the design right. And they're going to, yes, reduce the likelihood of crashes because we don't have as much of that interaction. Now, if they were physically separated, if you had decided that that was more of a priority, then you could start to talk about exposure alterations, but yeah, predominantly likelihood. So service roads at low speed, altering the, well, I'd predominantly say the likelihood of crashes and the severity of crashes there. The exposure becomes a bit murky when you're doing that because you're still having the number of vehicles, assuming that, you know, same number of vehicles and pedestrians and cyclists. So you're not really altering the numbers as much. So we're going to call that one more a likelihood and severity for that lower speed. So we've got a lot of good answers there in terms of that sort of separation and giving different lanes and different facilities for different road users. And we do have some people pushing for crossing points. And this is probably where, because you're demanding that movement function, you are going to start to create more crossing points rather than that free-for-all crossing, which is really aligned with that place value, but it can degrade some of the movement function. So, so we're looking to try to find those balances. Priority for public transport and the like. Again, yeah, the way you do this to ensure you get increased alignment with safe system principles is all about the details of the design. But in principle, yeah, you could do that and get some nice reductions in likelihood and potentially severity. Yeah, okay. This is really good. It's all good stuff I'm getting in here. I'm not going to delve into too many more of those in details because I've got some content I want to get through at the end here of this session. Like here's again an artistic impression, and you've got to take everything artists do with a grain of salt on road network design. But you know, the general stand back, look at it principle is pretty good, isn't it? I mean, we've got obviously more place value here, and it's actually quite a nice place for people with the wider areas, the interaction, the trading, the dining. We still are providing the movement corridor, and remembering there that the movement is cyclists, the movement is the public transport, the movement is also the vehicles and the trucks. So we're moving them through there. Now, getting these areas down to a 40 km/h from a 70, okay, it might seem like, you know, in our traditional way of thinking about the network, we're like, oh my God, the movement function, you know, it was but when it's redesigned like this and it's got that different feel to it and look to it, it can be more palatable and it certainly aligns better with safe system principles. And we still do get movement through there. It just might not be that movement where we are just saying, well, how many cars did we fit through there per hour? You know, that style of thinking, more holistic thinking of movement. And that's very much the way we're moving in our, you know, management of the road network in that thinking. There are going to be areas that still cars have that, cars and trucks have that major function, but they will be sort of designed accordingly. There's little bits of challenges associated with this, but you do see some interesting things, sort of reduced speed at some of the conflict points there, utilization of service roads and the like to sort of separate out and even provide that sense of a faster route as such in the middle, and then they're slower as you're getting closer to the areas of more trade and interaction and the like. So not going to dwell too much more on that. But when we sort of see that play out, we're seeing us trying to provide those facilities and interact those within the road environment, protected intersections and the like, examples sort of this sort of stuff, which are, becoming more and more as you're trying to get road users into safer environments through these areas that still retain place value. And we talked there about your decision making on, is this a change, the addition of this bicycle facility, is that a change in the exposure to crashes, the likelihood of crashes, or the severity of crashes with bicycles? I would say it's a change to the likelihood of crashes. They are still exposed to crashes, in my opinion, both from vehicles distracted or whatever it is, leaving their lane, and they, the bit of curbing there is not enough to stop a vehicle entering the lane. They also have all of the turn in and coming out facilities to deal with. So for me, these are likelihood reducing factors in a safe system assessment framework. At what point they actually change is there's a little bit of grey in there. There's a fact sheet to help you a little bit along the way there. When we get to these big movement corridors, and as I say, there could be movement of cyclists, it could be movement of public transport, it could be movement of cars, we move with a combination, we're really actively able to reduce the place value of it, okay? So in the one we had before, where we had the pedestrian overpass, I would say that if you have an area that wants high place value, you don't have a pedestrian overpass. Because that's immediate reduction in place value, right? That is much more aligned in your movement corridor. That separation of road users from that perspective. The way I suppose you could have that is if you have your grade separated facility with the place function on that grade separated facility. But we're almost into tunnels there, aren't we? So you're going to provide a movement corridor under a place, right? That's great if we can afford to do that. Absolutely, you've got some wonderful benefits out of that all around. But in a lot of our network, we're gonna have to be making these hard choices and trying to drag things back and forth between, from a vibrant street style environment, either into a movement corridor or into more place corridor, and you're going to make some decisions accordingly. But in an area like this, if defined as major traffic route and movement corridor, I'm okay to start to heavily restrict some of those place values, because that's what we've just said. And it could be barriers. It could be barriers down the side of the road. It could be grade separations if you can afford it, or underpasses, or it could be, the occasional set of lights and some real restrictions here. Definitely separated facilities for cyclists, physical separation facilities for cyclists, or banning cyclists altogether if you've decided it's a major traffic route. And have an appropriate parallel sort of movement corridor of their own. So we can start to almost sort of move it towards motorway style stuff, or for cycle facilities, taking those lanes, or taking public lanes for public transport for that extra movement corridor. But it's about moving things through there fast, and thus you want to limit or eliminate that permeability, the interaction from pedestrians, the crossing, the trading, the interaction. It's not going to be a nice place to hang out, but that's the point of it. You do need to remember your conflict points in these and still address those with speed management and safe system principles. So slowing vehicles through the big intersections really still important. Even though it's a movement corridor, we've still got to keep things within those tolerable energy limits. So pedestrians and cyclists, we know they are most vulnerable to injury. We know sort of around a 10% risk of severe injury of about the 20 kilometers per hour, up to about the 30 for death, and somewhere around that, 50 kilometers per hour, we're pretty certain death's going to happen for that direct strike. Young and old, even more vulnerable, obviously. And so we're trying to ideally manage speeds around that 20 kilometers per hour where that crossing is happening and where that interaction is happening. Otherwise, trying to seek that separation. Now, there's a little bit of play within that, a little bit of judgment required, and you'll do that quite well. We know those separating facilities are working quite nicely, putting cyclists curbside, utilising parked vehicles. Are we at the point of calling this a change in exposure? Almost, I reckon. As well, it's all about how vehicles get in and out of properties and side roads and the like. But generally, we're in some pretty good spots. And then we've got to sort of analyse these wonderful facilities that we know have great wins for severity and likelihood, sometimes really severity for passenger vehicles, like a roundabout. We've talked about that. Not giving us as good benefits for cyclists and pedestrians. And so how do you sort of create wins all around? And we see these things like the protected roundabouts, for example, here, which is a sort of another artistic impression, but I think I've got next a real photo of this one. But we're seeing there, not only are we having reduced likelihood of crashes due to clear priority, elevation, better sight of pedestrians crossing and cyclists crossing, but we're seeing the reduction in severity due to the fact that we've got the roundabout, we've got the raised platform, we've got all sorts of good features. I don't have the live one of that, but I can provide that to anybody who's interested. And then you can, use similar thinking on larger roundabouts and how do we create separation? How do we create lower speeds and conflict points? Here's some, different ideas for larger separated roundabouts where, you have riders come off the road and they sort of deviate slightly over their own facility, maybe with priority, but if they have to do the right turn, maybe they have to wait there. So we're getting wonderful, reductions in likelihood and severity at these locations. Still exposed to crashes because having to have a conflict point there with vehicles that are coming in and crossing, but lower likelihood, lower severity. Down here, we're sort of probably mainly focusing on the likelihood, and the severity going to be coming through if you're doing a retrofit to a multi-lane roundabout. If there was sort of no intersection there and this was a brand new roundabout, you might get some reduction in severity because of the speed reduction of the roundabout, but we just analyze through all of this. Adapted Dutch diagram here just for your maybe your use, but sort of those low speeds we can mix because the severity will be very low. Using prize for the person who tells me what that is first. I stumped everybody. I'm sure somebody knows what that marking is. There we go, Alex. Alex is on there. It's a Sharrow, correct? Yeah, so, the idea, broad principles here, the ability to share when our severity is low and the likelihood is low. As you increase your speeds, you want physical separation, be that a barrier or a big curbing or the like, or utilizing parking. And then at your high speeds, you hit up the exposure and completely separate the facility and move it into no exposure. So pedestrians, I'm going to briefly touch on that. So in that roundabout design and the ability for a vehicle to store is important, as Neil's rightly pointed out there. So the idea of pedestrians crossing, and to me, the wombat crossing or the raised pedestrian crossing, depending on where you come from, is just such a wonderful safe system aligned feature. It just ticks all the boxes for me because you've addressed likelihood due to elevation, due to clear priority, and you've addressed severity due to the lower speeds. We know that just an at-grade zebra crossing or at-grade pedestrian crossing is not a great safety feature. In fact, in some situations, well, quite a few situations, it increases the risk of pedestrian crashes in terms of the likelihood of them. The likelihood's down, the severity's up. Sometimes likelihood even go up a little bit because of pedestrians, walking straight out without looking because they have priority, but also vehicles with speed and inability to stop and those sorts of things. So, but the raising of it is just an amazing feature to significantly improve both likelihood and severity. And so it's really a wonderful feature. This one's out of New Zealand, which is red, which is an interesting culture. I think New Zealanders are all getting rid of the red ones for some ability to see the difference in color if you've got color vision issues. But anyway, that's an aside. So we've got some points about Queensland and slip lanes, and that's slip lanes are just a fascinating debate going on within our industry at the moment, and their impact on pedestrian safety and different ways to treat pedestrian safety. So I do understand that, Queensland's going down an approach of either removing them or signalising all wombat crossings for the slip lane. And I mean, certainly the wombat crossing is a wonderful feature, and nobody is really arguing with its better alignment with safe system principles. It can be a little bit annoying for some of the larger vehicles navigating that, but again, you can design that into it. So pedestrians developing a false sense of security is another question that comes in. And for me, the thing is, clarity on priority is so important in our likelihood. So I don't like to see features that, what do they call them in New Zealand? A courtesy crossing, right? Which is where they've pretty much done all of this, but they don't actually make a pedestrian priority. So it's sort of like, you could cross here, but they don't have the actual zebra crossing markings, but they've done different features to try to encourage pedestrians to cross. To me, I'm not a fan of that from a likelihood perspective of the potential confusion of priority. And I often do that, often without the raised bit, which is really bad because you're not actually getting any severity benefit out of that as well. We do see that quite a bit around areas where there is sort of attempts to encourage pedestrians to cross at points and maybe encourage drivers to slow down, but not doing it in the full way. So clear priority, I think, is wonderful, and just lowering speeds at conflict points that we know. I got a little rule of thumb, and you might not quite share this, but if you have the pedestrian volumes and desire lines to warrant pedestrian priority, as in a zebra crossing, you also have the pedestrian numbers and desire to raise it and slow vehicles down. Or if you go, the bus route and trucks, and they're lobbying and picketing, and they're not going to let that happen. Well, then you can do it with speed cushions or something. But if you're at that point, you've got to slow vehicles. That's where your pedestrians, your most vulnerable, are going to be crossing. So you could do a speed cushion so the bus can straddle it or whatever. But buses don't have any trouble going over these things anyway. And there's other spin-off benefits of accessibility, and as I mentioned, the vision of pedestrians crossing on a raised facility. This one, though, I'll just briefly sort of show you. We have known how to create safe system environments for pedestrians for a very long time. And this is an example in Adelaide photo I was given, but I saw the overarching elements of it. But anyway, there was a couple of road users working sorry, not road users, workers. Like they were doing stuff on the electrical conduits and everything in the island there. And they were working there for a couple of weeks or something. It was all going on. And so this is in South Australia. So in order for them to do their work safely, they reduced the speed limit on this road from 60 at the time it was, it's not 60 anymore, to 25 kilometres per hour, because that's South Australia's work zone speed limit. Physical barriers to separate. Off they went, did their work, finished, packed up, took the barriers away, speed back to 60, and then about 3,000 pedestrians a day standing in that spot, crossing here, crossing there. So why is it that the workers are afforded that level of safety? But the general public will say, it's up to you, really, like, be alert. The reality is that, I mean, yes, the workers are looking at their work and not, concentrating on traffic and the like, but hey, a lot of those pedestrians are looking at their, phone, or intoxicated, or, not, concentrating on different things. So it's more just the philosophical disparity there, that same physical vulnerability, worker, pedestrian, just one, we put all responsibility onto the individual, and the other, we say the system needs to be altered here to significantly reduce that risk. But we're getting better at this, and we're creating more facilities, and we're doing far better, and we need to continue to work on it. We're now seeing, better facilities when pedestrians having to store in the middle of the road. I do say, though, that anybody who does do an assessment on a public transport area, or anywhere that does have public transport, your likelihood of pedestrian crashes just is way up. And that's because people will run for their tram or their bus or their train and take incredible risk doing it. And so we just sort of factor that into our assessment. And you go, well, tram stop in the middle of the road, likelihood people running to get their tram getting struck, that's way up. We actually know that. I mean, in Melbourne, there's a study, and it showed that there is double the pedestrian risk on a tram route compared to its parallel non-tram route. Maybe there's a fair bit of exposure, alterations in that, but anyway. So lots of good ways, raising areas. I can't stress that enough, because it just aligns so well with safe system principles, slowing vehicles through intersections, through crossing points, through, the threshold area. Here's some nice space for the vehicle to prop as it comes in. And speed limit reductions. Here's our year of regulatory speed limit reduction for urban areas from 60 to 50. Pretty big drop in pedestrian casualties over that time. So there you go. Let's just see if anybody's got any questions on pedestrians and cyclists before I cover motorcyclists, and then give you a little bit of time, hopefully, to finish your quiz and finish your assignment if you need to. Okay, appropriate use of median pedestrian fences. Yeah, that's an interesting one. For me, it has to be a pretty dominant movement corridor for for vehicles, basically, and well, can be cyclists as well. I don't like corralling pedestrians for a couple of reasons. One is the erosion to the place value if you're trying to retain any place value of an area. But from a pure road safety perspective, it is the potential for trapping pedestrians. And pedestrians' attraction to a desire line is pretty damn strong. And we will see people who will walk on the road because we've trapped them on the road because their desire line has a pedestrian fence in the way of it. So we need to be very sort of careful of that as to how you do it. And then people trying to jump fences and having trouble with that and different sorts of trouble. So it's a very delicate, thoughtful design land use choice when you're going to use pedestrian fencing in the median for that perspective. But there are some roads and some environments where big movement corridor, major traffic route, and we're really trying to restrict pedestrian access severely. You can do it median, but you can also do it on curbside as well. All right, let's jump on to motorcyclists. And let's see, anybody's got any interesting comments here. The motorcyclist we categorize as another vulnerable road user. And I've got 5 sort of S's I use for motorcycle safety, and anybody who's done the Making Roads Motorcycle Friendly course with myself and colleagues will be aware of that. Their vulnerability is huge, as people are commenting. So sight, surface signs, strike, and speed. So this is, can the motorcyclist be seen? Or can the motorcyclist see what's coming? Are we providing appropriate surfaces? Are there warning signs? Or are there signs to warn, control, advise? What is the motorcyclist going to hit, and how bad is that going to be when they crash? And what speed do we travel? And we look at these 5 S's and break them down. We see that the ones that are influencing the likelihood are the sight, the surface, and the signs. The severity is the strike. Now we're crashing. How bad is it going to be? And the speed is both the likelihood and the severity of crash, as we've talked about for other road users as well. Now, there's some really sort of cutting-edge, world-leading research that's come out recently from Sweden on injury curves of motorcyclists and crash risk for different crash types. And it's something that we've been craving as an industry for quite a while. I'm not going to go through this in detail. I can provide that. I've provided the reference down there, although it's to have been hidden by that QR code. But I can certainly provide that if people have an interest. It's slightly above, it's above our pedestrians and cyclists. This hasn't filtered into too many of the Austroads guys or anything like that yet, but it's interesting just to understand. So let's briefly look at these. The likelihood of motorcycle crashes is sort of driven by the fact that they're smaller, they're inherently unstable, but as in on 2 wheels. But they can be hidden behind smaller things like trees and the like. So smaller sightline constraints can be are more pronounced than increasing the likelihood of motorcycle crashes. Harder to see, hidden behind things, all of those challenges, the inherent instability of the likelihood factors, sort of inherent likelihood factors. The surface also that likelihood factor, and the fact that a motorcyclist takes that sort of lean to go around a curve or a corner. I'm a licensed motorcycle rider, I should say. I'm way too scared to actually ride, but I did enough riding in order to understand more about the needs of motorcyclists and be able to do better sort of stakeholder interaction with motorcycle communities and the like. So I've done some riding. I would not call myself a good rider, but anyway, motorcycles lean to take a curve, as you know, very small contact patches on the road. And what it means, though, is the physics of that basically says that the surface is highly important. And we call motorcyclists the canary in the coal mine for surface defects. They're the first ones to be killed or seriously injured. So surface becomes quite a factor in the likelihood of motorcycle crashes in your safe system assessment. And it's going to be more, you're going to put more weight on that for motorcycles than you are for four-wheeled vehicles or six-wheeled vehicles. So things like, all of our suite of pavement issues, potholes, bleeding, flushing, rutting, you name it, are all going to increase. And also things that are put into the road surface, like steel plates, and you can imagine it with a bit of moisture on it, maybe the dark, maybe the rider's following behind a truck so it doesn't see it until the last minute. You can conjure up sort of why the likelihood of crashes have gone up significantly with a steel plate like that. Signs, really actually great feature to reduce motorcycle likelihood due to the fact that they are highly attentive to signage. And we have special signage for motorcyclists if you want to warn of that particular hazard. These are sort of things you can recommend if you identify particular hazard. You go, that's really increasing the likelihood of motorcycle crashes. You can, warn of that particular thing. Be quite effective in the likelihood. Reducing motorcyclists see it, they react to it. But general our signage and just getting that signage right is good. The strike hazard now we're into severity for motorcyclists, right? And let's have a look at sort of barriers, because they come up a lot with motorcyclists in one form or another. But let's try and understand severity for motorcyclists from that biomechanical tolerable limits. And I'm going to show you underrun protection crash testing using what we have up there, which is the 80 kilogram motorcycle dummy, which is a normal crash test dummy where you do a little bit of tweaking around with a few bits and pieces of it and put it in some motorcycle gear, and then you crash it. And the European barrier test for motorcycles happens at 60 kilometers per hour, 25-degree angle, 80 kilogram dummy. And the forces, we're trying to ensure that it doesn't kill or level 3 serious injury the dummy. So let's have a look without any underrun protection. So straight into a post of a barrier. So hopefully you can see that. And now with the underrun protection, so that's like a rub rail or there's different brand names for them. So you can see it's about deflecting the energy. And we know that brings us to within tolerable limits, and it's a pass on that sort of test with a bit of cushioning and a redirection. Redirection's the key. That first one, that rode off the dummy. So our Transport for New South Wales friends, that was one of your $360,000 dummies at Crash Lab that just got obliterated in that little test. But it shows you the kind of forces that we're dealing with solid objects and motorcycles. Now, I'm not going to go into detail, but I know there was a question a little bit about wire rope safety barriers. So I better address that before I jump into speed, because it. Okay. So before I talk about wire rope safety barriers, I'll address this one. Rub rail has been an issue for rural areas with wildlife movement, and certainly, yes, I've done designs of underrun protection with wombat holes and the like. Wombats particularly seem to be obviously challenged on that because they can't get under. Other wildlife, we don't have any really good evidence that it's the underrun protections affected them in the sense they can jump over the barrier systems very easily, but certainly wombats have been a challenge. We also have issue on the design with snow drift, debris, clutter. So, there's some design specifics you've got to work through on the underrun. But from that severity of incident perspective from the motorcyclist, it's very beneficial on your W-beam systems. So your Type B in Victoria or your, we call it New South Wales, G4, your G4 systems. I think you call it, I think it's called G4 in all other jurisdictions. I don't know, call it Type B in Victoria. Anyway, that's right. It's because our rail's slightly shorter than the rest of Australia, which is an anomaly. Sorry, I'm off topic. Yeah, so there's some design specifics, and you can use it on flexible W beams as well. Now, wire rope safety barrier gets this sort of like, oh, the cheese cutter, you know, you're going to slice motorcyclists in 6 pieces and the most dangerous thing ever. Transport for New South Wales, over like a 10-year period, has just been continuously commissioning work out of University of New South Wales, and then, you know, Austroads has got on board and everything. Yeah, there's just tons now of information about wire rope safety barriers in motorcyclists that show that for a number of reasons, it's not the issue that it's being made out to be. And in fact, I talk to the motorcycle community and say they're doing a fairly big disservice to themselves and their community and banging on about it the way they do, because it's not an issue. And it's taking attention away from some pretty significant motorcycle safety issues. The reason it's not an issue is a few. So one reason is that many of you will know who do barrier design is you cannot put a wire rope safety barrier on a curve with a radius less than 200. And the reason for that is I'm going to sort of draw a, oh no, I'm not on pen. I'm going to draw a little bit of barrier system here. But you're looking down on the road, bird's eye view here of a barrier. It's going to be a wire rope system. And so you're installing your wire rope system on this popular motorcycle route curve, and you've done a nice big concrete terminal, and you've gone, yeah, beautiful. Now let's tension up wire rope barrier. Tension, 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 tension. What's it going to do? It's going to pop into the middle of the road. And you'll know that for anybody who has installed a barrier on anywhere near a 200. You tension it, your posts start to, you see your posts start to, they want to go into the middle of the road, right? So we just simply don't use wire rope safety barrier on popular motorcycle touring routes, at least, right? Because we can't. So that's one aspect. The second aspect is where we do use wire rope safety barrier often are our big, longish roads. Long, straightish roads, right? On the outside often. And they're predominantly a fatigue management device where people are falling asleep, they're leaving the road, they hit the barrier system. Motorcyclists do not tend to fall asleep on the bike and drift off the road the same way a passenger vehicle does. So they're not subject to that risk. Okay. There are some little incidents though in the particular design where we do have a little bit of increased motorcycle risk associated with the way it's configured. Maybe it's a central system with a bit of an undulating environment. We've got a bit of an increased risk. This is where I would be considering the use of flexible W beam with underarm protection. The reason for that is we don't have, for wire rope systems, a great redirective system for the energy. Well, all we have, and only some jurisdictions even use this, are post padding. So it's like the equivalent of your goalpost padding, where you put a padding around each post of the wire rope system to try to absorb some of that energy. It just cannot be as effective a redirection of energy along the system, and nobody's come up with that invention. And we're not talking about little companies here. We're talking about multinational, barrier design and hardware companies. So if there was a market for that, they would be doing it absolutely for sure, and they do it. But the fact of the matter is that they know, as well as most road authorities know and designers know, is that this is not a risk. Like the risk is so tiny that we're not going to be like doing this. Because if you're in those situations like this or this, you're going to use a flexible barrier system with flexible W beam with underarm protection anyway. Yeah, that's a little bit of an explanation on that one. But let's talk about speed in our last couple of minutes here. We've got many ways to influence the speed of riders, and it reduces the likelihood and severity of crashes. And we know that advisory speeds work quite well. People will often say, oh, but the motorcyclists, they don't follow that, or they double that. And, the point of it is to ensure the route is consistent and all the curves are consistent, and provide that consistency, which reduces the likelihood of crashes. No surprises is a likelihood reducing factor. The severity comes down as long as we're keeping those speeds in check there as well. The regulatory speed limits, guideposts, good, advisory, line marking, narrowing, a whole lot of, the suite of things you can do to influence speed is huge. It's really interesting work. We're doing a project for Australia at the moment on perceptual countermeasures, again, for motorcyclists, which is alterations to your line marking or your guidepost setup and the like to try to change perceptions of the road environment to slow speeds. It's interesting, fun stuff. There's lots we can do to influence speed. But when you do a safe system assessment, you are going to have to analyze exposure, likelihood, and severity for motorcyclists as a specific road user and crashes involving motorcyclists. You're going to be thinking about those sorts of things. You're going to do the same for pedestrians. You're going to do the same for cyclists, and you're going to do the same for cars and trucks. And if you had something different that you wanted to include in there in a specific, because you didn't think it quite fitted into any of those, like, I don't know, e-scooters or something like that, you can, within a safe system assessment, get that as its own type of incident crash that you're thinking about. Okay, so that's what I wanted to get through today. So thank you for that. I'll just pause there, see if anybody has any questions about the content, but also about what you need to do. So at the end, so today's session, all you have is a quiz to do. So jump in there, do the quiz. If you haven't yet finished your assignment, do that. As I said last time, it should only take you 10 minutes or so. Quick jotting down of some ideas on exposure and likelihood and severity, and uploading it to Moodle. And those will be marked probably over the weekend. And I always actually enjoy, I've had a quick look, as I said, to just see where the group was going. But I do enjoy these because I get to see some pretty interesting intersections that you've given, but also just checking that we've got our head around exposure, likelihood, and severity. Because next session is teaching you how to score, how to use the matrix, and getting you all set up to go out and do your real live safe system assessment. And I say real, it's a mock safe system assessment, but it follows the correct process, and you go through the steps. We've chopped a few things out because we don't want you to have to sort of take a few days out of your work life. We wanted to narrow it down just to a few key things we want to ensure you're competent at. Any questions or comments? Very good. Okay, well, thank you. And the recording will be available. Have a good afternoon. We'll see you at the next session. If you've got any questions or you want clarification or something, get in contact with myself or Emma, of course, if it's logistical style stuff. But have a great afternoon.